The accountant set 3 folders on the table between us. One red, one blue, one green. And before she opened a single one of them, she looked at me across her desk and said, very quietly, very carefully, "Sandra, I want you to prepare yourself. Because what I found in these records is not a mistake. It is not a bookkeeping error. It is not a misunderstanding about expense categorization. What I found across 37 months of financial statements is a deliberate, systematic theft from your family's business. And the person who did it knew exactly what they were doing, exactly how to hide it, and exactly how long they could continue before someone like me started asking the right questions. I sat across from her in that office. My mother's accountant of 19 years, a woman named Ruth Garland, who had filed tax returns for our family's restaurant since the year my mother opened it, since the year I was 11 years old, and spent my summers in that kitchen learning to fold napkins and memorize the specials. And I felt something shift inside my chest in a way that I recognized distantly as the specific physical sensation of a world reorganizing itself around a new and permanent truth. My brother Kevin had been stealing from our restaurant, not hundreds of dollars, not a register shortfall here and there, the kind of small discrepancies that happen in any cash business and that you write off as human error and move past. 37 months, $2,412 per month on average. A total, Ruth told me, setting the red folder open on the desk between us, of approximately $89,300. Our mother had died 8 months earlier. She had left the restaurant. Carlisle's, a 43-seat Italian-American family restaurant in Raleigh, North Carolina, that she had built from a single borrowed commercial kitchen and a handwritten menu into a genuinely beloved local institution over 22 years. To Kevin and me, equally, in her will. A 50-50 split. A decision she had made, as she told us both privately in her final months, because she trusted us equally and believed we would run it together the way she had always imagined. Kevin had apparently begun stealing from it 14 months before she died. Before I tell you what was in those 3 folders and what the restaurant's own security camera footage had quietly captured across 3 years of Saturday night closing shifts, tell me, where are you watching from right now? What city? What time? I read every comment, every single one, and I want to know where this story reaches. And I want to be upfront before we go any further. This is a work of fiction, written for entertainment. The names, the people, the events. None of it is real, and any resemblance to anyone living is entirely coincidental. My name is Sandra Carlisle. I'm 38 years old, and I grew up in that restaurant the way some children grow up in a backyard or a neighborhood park. It was the fixed, constant, defining geography of my childhood, the place where I understood what work looked like and what it meant to build something with your hands and your patience and your willingness to show up on the days when showing up was the last thing you felt like doing. My mother, Eleanor Carlisle, opened Carlisle's when I was 11, and Kevin was 14. She had spent the previous 6 years working as a line cook at various restaurants around Raleigh, saving every dollar she could, teaching herself every station in every kitchen that would hire her, learning the business from the inside out with the particular systematic determination of someone who has a very specific goal and is willing to take the long road to get there. She opened the restaurant with $64,000, $42,000 of her own savings, $22,000 borrowed from my grandmother at 0 interest and repaid in full within 3 years. She hired 2 employees for the first 6 months. She worked 7 days a week for the first 2 years without taking a single day off. Kevin and I grew up working in that kitchen. Not as a punishment or an obligation, but because our mother made it feel, somehow, like a privilege. Like being trusted with something that mattered. She taught me to run the front of house when I was 16, to manage a section of tables, to handle a reservation book, a difficult customer, and a broken dishwasher, all before my junior year of high school. She taught Kevin the back office, the invoices, the vendor relationships, the weekly bookkeeping that she eventually handed to Ruth when it grew complex enough to require professional oversight. Kevin was, by every appearance, good at it. He was organized, detail-oriented, the kind of person who remembered vendor terms and invoice due dates, and the specific pricing agreements we'd negotiated with our produce suppliers. My mother trusted him with the back office completely, the way she trusted Ruth with the tax filings. The relief of knowing that the operational details she didn't have time to monitor every hour were in competent hands. That trust, I would come to understand, was the precise vulnerability Kevin had exploited. I should tell you about Kevin's wife, Melissa, because this story cannot be accurately told without her. Melissa had married Kevin 11 years ago, and I had, for most of those 11 years, maintained a careful, functional relationship with her. Not close, not warm in the way of genuine affection, but respectful, manageable, the kind of relationship you build with a family member's spouse when you don't particularly connect with them but genuinely want to, for everyone's sake. Melissa had a specific quality I had identified early in her marriage to Kevin and never quite lost sight of. She was interested, primarily, in the appearance of financial stability. And she was interested in that appearance specifically as a reflection of status. The right neighborhood, the right car, the right vacation destinations, the right school for their 2 children. Kevin earned a comfortable salary from the restaurant, $62,000 annually, which my mother had set at a level that reflected both his genuine contribution to the business and the reality of what a family restaurant at our volume could sustainably support. It was, by any reasonable measure, a decent salary for his role. It was not, apparently, sufficient to support the life Melissa had decided they should be living. Kevin and Melissa lived in a house in a Raleigh suburb that, I would later learn, cost approximately $420,000 and carried a mortgage payment of just over $2,800 per month. They drove 2 relatively new vehicles, a 3-year-old SUV and a 2-year-old sedan, with combined monthly payments of approximately $940. Their 2 children attended a private elementary school whose annual tuition totaled $31,000 for both children combined. Melissa had, over the preceding 3 years, developed a particular enthusiasm for home renovation. A kitchen remodel, a primary bathroom expansion, a finished basement. That had, across that same period, totaled an estimated $94,000 in contracted work. Kevin's $62,000 salary, before taxes, did not support this lifestyle. The restaurant's cash register, manipulated carefully and systematically over 37 months, apparently did. I need to explain how Ruth Garland found it, because the how matters as much as the what. Ruth had been filing our family's tax returns for 19 years. She was, by temperament, a thorough and somewhat conservative accountant. The kind of professional who does not take aggressive positions, who asks follow-up questions about ambiguous expense categories, who checks and cross-references and flags discrepancies she encounters rather than simply processing the numbers as she receives them. 8 months after my mother's death, with the restaurant now owned equally by Kevin and me, I had asked Ruth to do something she hadn't been specifically asked to do before. Not just file the annual return, but conduct a full operational audit of the restaurant's financial statements for the previous 3 years. I wanted to understand, as a new co-owner, exactly what we had inherited in terms of financial health before making any decisions about the business's future. Ruth had said yes. She had asked for access to the complete records. The point-of-sale system reports, the vendor invoices, the bank statements, the payroll records, the petty cash logs, the expense receipts. Kevin had provided them. He had provided them, I think, because he believed. With the specific, dangerous confidence of someone who has been doing something successfully for a long time, that they were clean enough to withstand a standard review. He did not know that Ruth Garland's definition of a standard review involved cross-referencing the POS system's gross sales reports against the bank deposit records, line by line, for every operating week across 36 months. He also did not know that Ruth had, in the course of that cross-referencing, noticed a pattern. Small, consistent, carefully maintained, in which the weekly deposit amounts were systematically, between 4 and 6% lower than the gross sales figures the POS system recorded. 4 to 6%. Every week. For 37 months. Not randomly distributed, the way genuine operational losses tend to distribute themselves. Sometimes high, sometimes low, sometimes zero. Perfectly, consistently, deliberately maintained within that narrow band. The band of someone who understood, precisely, how much variance a restaurant's financial records could absorb before triggering the kind of attention he was trying to avoid. Ruth had opened the red folder first. The red folder was the deposit discrepancy analysis. Every week, every amount, every calculated gap between what the register recorded and what reached the bank. The blue folder was the expense analysis. A separate pattern Ruth had found in the vendor invoice records, where invoices from 3 specific vendors had been, across the same period, consistently submitted for amounts slightly higher than the actual contracted rates, with the difference. Small amounts, always within the range of plausible pricing variation. Apparently redirected through a vendor payment account that, when Ruth traced it, resolved to a business checking account in Kevin's name rather than the vendor's. The green folder, which Ruth opened last, was the simplest and, in some ways, the most damaging. Printed screenshots from a personal financial monitoring service showing significant, regular deposits into a joint account belonging to Kevin and Melissa Carlisle that were inconsistent with Kevin's documented salary and had no apparent legitimate source. $89,300. 37 months. Methodical, careful, and until Ruth Garland cross-referenced the POS system against the deposit records. Entirely invisible. I did not go home after Ruth's office. I drove directly to the restaurant. Carlisle's was closed on Mondays. Had been since the beginning, because my mother had believed firmly that her staff deserved a guaranteed day off, and that she herself needed at least 1 day per week away from the building to remain, as she put it, a person and not just a restaurateur. I had a key, obviously. So did Kevin. The building was empty. I let myself in through the back entrance, walked through the kitchen. The kitchen I had known since I was 11 years old. The same 6-burner range my mother had purchased used from a restaurant supply auction and that we'd had professionally serviced every 18 months for 22 years. And I stood in the middle of it for several minutes, doing nothing, simply existing in the space where my mother had built everything she'd built. Then I went to the back office. The restaurant had installed a security camera system 4 years earlier after a minor equipment theft from the storage area. A standard system, 12 cameras covering the dining room, kitchen, bar area, back entrance, and crucially, the back office where the cash drawer reconciliation was done each evening at closing. I had not, until that afternoon, thought to review the back office camera footage from closing shifts. I sat at my mother's desk, still her desk, still with her handwriting on the sticky notes she'd left on the monitor, still with her reading glasses in the top right drawer, because neither Kevin nor I had been able to bring ourselves to remove them. And I pulled up the security system's archived footage. I went back 6 weeks to a Saturday closing shift. Kevin always handled Saturday closings personally, a pattern I had attributed to his sense of ownership over the administrative side of things, and that I now understood in a considerably different light. The footage was clear, well-lit, and entirely unambiguous. Kevin at the closing desk. The cash drawer is open, his hand moving between the cash tray and his jacket pocket. Not once, not twice, but in a practiced, methodical sequence that took approximately 4 minutes, and that he clearly performed with the specific efficiency of someone who has done the same thing many times before. I watched 6 weeks of Saturday closing footage in approximately 2 hours. The pattern was identical every week. Same sequence. Same jacket pocket. Same 4 minutes. I called Sandra Perkins, our family attorney, the same sharp, methodical woman who had handled Thomas's property case, who had, at some point in the previous decade, become the attorney I called whenever something required. Someone who combined genuine legal competence with the ability to remain professionally composed while receiving extremely upsetting information. "Sandra," I said, when she answered, "I need you to tell me what the evidentiary threshold is for a criminal theft charge in North Carolina, because I have 37 months of financial records, 3 folders from my accountant, and 6 weeks of security camera footage, and I need to know exactly how much of this I need before I make a call I can't take back." There was a brief pause. "How soon can you be in my office?" she said. Sandra Perkins reviewed everything in a single 4-hour meeting the following morning. Ruth Garland's 3 folders, the security camera footage I had transferred to a drive, the vendor account records, and the deposit discrepancy analysis. She asked questions with the quick, focused precision of someone building a case in real time rather than simply assessing damage. At the end of the 4 hours, she set her pen down on her legal pad and looked at me. "The camera footage alone," she said, "is sufficient for a criminal charge. Combined with Ruth's analysis, the vendor account records, and the deposit discrepancy pattern. This is not a closed case, Sandra. This is an exceptionally well-documented theft by a person who is in a position of trust. The only question before you is how you want to proceed. And I want you to take some time to think about that, because the answer you give will have consequences that are difficult to reverse." I told her I had already thought about it. I thought about my mother, working 7 days a week for 2 years without a day off. I thought about the $64,000 she had saved over 6 years as a line cook. Every dollar of it earned in someone else's kitchen, working toward a specific dream she could see clearly enough to be patient for. I thought about 22 years of genuinely good food and genuinely good service, and the kind of reputation that can only be built through consistent, daily, unglamorous effort, and about $89,300 extracted from that effort systematically across 37 months by the person who had been trusted to protect it. I told Sandra to file the criminal complaint. Kevin was arrested on a Thursday morning at the restaurant. A timing that was not my choice, but that resulted from the police warrant being executed at the business address on file. His car was in the parking lot when the detective arrived, which meant he was at the building when the arrest was made. I was not there. I had been told by Sandra Perkins that my presence would not be appropriate and would not serve my interests legally, and she was right, and I respected that advice. And I stayed home and sat at my kitchen table and thought about my mother's reading glasses still in the top right drawer of the back office desk. Melissa was not charged criminally. The evidence, while circumstantially compelling, was not sufficient to establish her direct knowledge and participation beyond a reasonable doubt. She was, however, named in the civil suit as a joint recipient of the misappropriated funds, and the judgment, when it came, applied to both of them jointly and severally, meaning both of them were fully liable for the complete repayment, regardless of how they allocated that responsibility between themselves. Kevin pleaded guilty to felony theft and breach of fiduciary duty. He was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, with eligibility for early release after 22 months contingent on a restitution payment schedule that required the full $89,300, plus legal fees and accrued interest, bringing the total to just over $104,000, to be repaid to the restaurant before any early release consideration would be reviewed. His 50% ownership stake in Carlisle's was transferred, through the civil judgment, to me as sole owner, effective the date of his criminal conviction. Carlisle's is still open. It will always be open, as long as I am capable of keeping it open. That is not a complicated decision for me, and it never will be. I hired a new back office manager within a month of assuming sole ownership. A meticulous, experienced woman named Patricia, who came with references from 3 restaurants I knew by reputation, and who, in her first week, suggested a financial oversight system that involves dual authorization on all cash deposits above $100, monthly cross-reference audits of POS sales against deposits, and a weekly summary report sent simultaneously to me and to Ruth Garland. I told her it sounded exactly right. Ruth Garland still files our tax returns. She will, I hope, for as many years as she is willing to. I reframed the photographs in the restaurant's front hallway, the ones that have hung there since my mother opened the place, showing the kitchen in its first week, the first full dining room, my mother in her chef's coat holding a spatula and squinting into the sun in the parking lot, the way she squinted whenever she was happy and the light was bright. I added one photograph, taken by one of our servers on a Tuesday afternoon, just after I assumed sole ownership, of me at the host stand, in the restaurant, looking out at the dining room. My mother is in all the frames except the last one. In the last one, it's just me. But I think she would recognize the place. I think she would recognize exactly what it still is, what it has been, across 22 years and one very serious attempt to drain it dry. Exactly what she built. Do you think Kevin's 3-year sentence was appropriate for stealing $89,000 from his own family's business? Or should the breach of his mother's trust have carried a harsher consequence? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, please subscribe to the Family Ledger. A brand new story drops every single day. Hit that bell. You don't want to miss what's coming next.